Ayan. Okay. So so for today, we will be having our second synchronous session. And probably the last synchronous session for this year. Hindi pala probably, definite na pala 'yon. We will have our last synchronous session for this course this 2020. Okay, kasi para may announcement yata ang school na next week, okay, would be considered as asynchronous. So basically, we do not need um, to meet online and live for next week. Okay, so iiwan na lang ako sa inyo ng siguro recorded lecture. Okay, and recorded lecture and reading materials. Tapos assignment. Okay. Which would be credited for next week. Okay. So for today, what we will discuss complex numbers and functions, and pasensya na kayo kung medyo nandito pa sa nasa libro ko pa mismo kukunin yung material. Okay? I decided kasi na meron na akong material sana nito, kaya lang I decided to include some other details in order for the material to be more comprehensive. Okay, so kaya lang medyo hindi ko inabot yung meeting natin ngayon. So basically, i-forward ko na lang siya sa inyo sometime mga susunod na araw. Okay? So, okay ba tayo doon? Okay, so sige. Mukhang tatlo pa lang yung nakikinig. Sige, bababa mo na ng hands. Okay, so let's start with complex numbers and functions. Pero basically, what we will cover in this material is complex numbers and functions lang. But we will not be actually covering complex differentiation. Okay? As much as I wanted to discuss yung calculus ng complex numbers, the problem is or hindi may problem, pero the thing is parang gusto ko muna kasing unahin ko yung mas kailangan natin in the future. Okay? And I feel like as it stands today, medyo least priority pa yung complex calculus. Okay? Or calculus of complex functions. Okay? So sa ngayon, medyo iiwanan ko muna yung topic na yun. Tsaka isa pa kasi hindi naman masyado nako-cover pa sa sa board exams yung topic ng complex differentiation. Okay, so medyo iiwanan ko muna yung topic na yun, and then let's deal with some of the basic things, or some of the basic topics that covers complex numbers. Okay, so let me introduce first the topic by in this manner. Okay, so kung maalala nyo kung maalala nyo nung nag-aaral tayo ng mathematics, okay? Simula kinder hanggang ngayong nag-college kayo. Isang parte ng pag-aaral natin ng mathematics as it evolves, as you actually grow up and tumataas yung level ninyo ng education, is that nag-extend lagi ng set. Okay, yung numbers natin. Okay, noong una tinuturuan lang kayo magbilang ng 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, siguro mga grade 1, grade 2. Tinuturuan kayo magbilang ng 1 2 3 4 5 and so on, which covers what we call the natural numbers or the whole numbers. Okay? So, nagsimula kayo doon sa natural numbers. And basically, these natural numbers, okay, diyan kayo nagsimula. Okay. And basically, these natural numbers are those that you have covered using counting fingers of your hands. So they are naturally occurring numbers. Okay. Now, later on, pinag-aralan niyo yung konsepto ng zero. Okay? So aside from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on, pinag-aralan niyo yung konsepto ng zero. Okay? Nung una naman, hindi naman tinuturo sa inyo yung zero, siguro mga kinder or grade 1. Hindi naman tinuturo sa inyo yung zero eh. Tinuro lang sa inyo yung zero siguro mga kalahati ng grade 1 papuntang grade 2. Okay, so dinagdag nyo siya ngayon dun sa nyo. So na-extend ngayon. Okay, na-extend ngayon yung ito nga ang gamitin natin. Let me use this one. Sync session 2. Ayan. Ito yung gamitin natin sa sa board para So, yun nga, sinabi natin na okay. So, from natural numbers, natural numbers, which includes the set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay? In-extend nyo yan para maging para ma-include yung number na 0. Okay, so that meron na kayong set of numbers as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay, so ang tawag nyo ngayon dito, ang tawag nyo ngayon dyan sa pinagsamang set na yan ay whole numbers. Okay? Na anuhan nyo to? Na tatandaan nyo to? Or maaaring hindi nyo matandaan ito kasi medyo matagal na rin to. Pero basically, ganyan yung order ng pagkakaaral nyo ng numbers. Okay. Then later on, siguro mga grade 3, 4, 5, 6, mga ganun. Pinag-aralan nyo yung konsepto ba na pag nag-divide ka ng pag nag-divide ka ng dalawang numbers, maaari yung sagot mo hindi whole number. For example, dati marunong kayo mag-divide ng say 4 divided by 2. Okay? Pwede kayo mag-divide ng 4 divided by 2. Okay, which becomes 2. Okay? So basically, kung isusulat natin ito in an alternate notation, meron kayong 4 over 2 equals 2. So nung nag-divide kayo ng dalawang numbers, nagkaroon pa rin yung sagot niya nandun pa rin sa whole numbers. So okay lang kayo diyan. Okay? Pero nagkaroon na kayo ng instance sometime grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, and grade 6 nga, na nag-divide na kayo ng number, say 7 divided by 4 na meron ng remainder. Okay? Pero hindi nyo na siya ginawang remainder. Hindi nyo na take into consideration muna yung remainder and you are taking this as a number itself. Okay? Doon pumasok ngayon yung tinatawag nating, anong una nyo tinawag dito? Sagot sa chat pagka may tanong ako gano'n. Anong number ang una niyong itinawag dito? O kaya sa audio, pwede sumagot sa audio. Anong tawag niyo sa number na to? Nung dati lang. Okay, so tinawag niyo tong fractions. Okay? Pero technically, we will call this as rational numbers. Okay? Pero tinawag niyo yun una ng fraction. Okay? So na-extend na naman yung yung numbers niyo. Meron kayong natural numbers, meron kayong 0, tapos yung mga fractions na matatagpuan nyo sa pagitan ng mga natural numbers. For example, kung i-construct niyo yan as a number line, kung ito yung 0, tapos ito yung 1, for example, nalaman nyo na yung numbers in between 0 and 1 can actually be represented by, for example, 1/2 to, can actually be represented by fractions. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, dati ang alam nyo lang is 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, yung number na yun sa number line. Ngayon, nalaman nyo na meron pala mga numbers na nag-i-exist sa pagitan nila. Sa pagitan ng mga whole numbers. Okay, so, halimbawa, kung meron sa pagitan ng 1 tsaka, halimbawa, ito yung 2. Okay? Meron kayong 3 halves dito sa pagitan nila. Meron kayong 3/4 dito, for example. Meron kayong, say, ano yung 1 and 1/4? 5/4. Okay, and so on. Tapos may mga nasa pagitan pa niyan. Okay? Nakuha to? Okay. So, sige. Ngayon. Oo nga pala, no, meron ba? Wait lang, I forgot something. I was excited in this discussion, so I thought, meron pala tayong foreign student, sorry. Okay. So, what happened then now, after this one, is, you did have to, yes, Mr. Mangapit, do you have questions?
Sir.
Ha? Wala naman? Okay. So, now after this, you now proceeded to siguro mga grade 6, grade 5, grade 6, or first year high school, grade 7. Okay. What happened then now was you were taught algebra. Okay, you were taught algebra na. Okay. So, in that case, you were now trying to answer some algebraic equations. Okay? Or algebraic equations. So, in that case, one thing that you learn first how to solve is a problem, something like x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, in which that means you have a number x, okay, that you have to add with positive 1, but should produce an answer of 0. Okay? So in that case, we know that an answer here would not exist on any of the sets of numbers that we have defined so far. Okay? Wala tayong sagot diyan. Dito sa problem na to, we cannot answer this with any of the numbers that we have here. Okay? So that's why we introduce another set of numbers. Okay? Which then included those numbers that are on the left of the 0 on the number line. Okay. Hence the concept of negative numbers. Okay. So we know for a fact that what happened was, if this is now your 0, okay, we have extended your number line not just on the on the right of your 0, but also on the left. Okay. So therefore, you now have your numbers as -1, -2, -3, -4. And if you can also remember, you have performed operations. Okay, you learned how to add and subtract negative numbers. Okay. Okay. Not just negative numbers, but also the positive numbers. Okay. You identify this part of the number line as that part of the negative numbers. Okay. And then this part as the part of the positive numbers. Okay. So you learn how to operate on this. Okay. Okay. You learn how to operate on this. Not just the negative numbers, but also the positive numbers. You also learn how to multiply and divide them. Naalala to? Siguro mga grade 6, ganun. You have encountered this mga around grade 5, grade 6, or grade 7, something like that. Okay? Now, collectively, okay, all these negative and positive numbers, including 0, okay, just those, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, okay, we call this set of number as, anong tawag natin doon sa mga numbers na yun? Yung negative numbers, the 0, tsaka positive numbers. Not including the fraction between them. So we call this all integers. Very good. Okay, so we call them integers. Okay. So now, we now have the idea of having integers. Okay, we now have rational numbers in between these integers. Okay, and so on. Okay, so in this case, medyo lumalaki ng lumalaki yung yung number set ninyo. Okay, and then finally, you now have to define another set of numbers that can actually solve something like x squared minus 2 equals 0. Okay? So numbers, equations, something like this one, cannot be solved or do not have answers in the current set of equations or current set of numbers that you have. Hindi nyo makukuha yung sagot niyan sa natural numbers as 0. Okay? Sa fraction. Okay? Hindi nyo rin yung makukuha as integers or kahit fractions ng integers or rational numbers. Okay? Because we take note that the answer to this one would be something like x equals plus or minus square root of 2. Right? Because we have to think, take note, the problem states that we have to think of a number that when we square, okay, or then when we multiply by itself and subtracted by 2 becomes 0. So, in that case, wala kayong maiisip na number agad-agad dyan that belongs to any of these numbers that we have discussed so far. That is why we have to invent or we have to extend then our set of numbers. Okay? And we find that these numbers are actually in between in between those previously defined. For example, yung value ng square root of 2, which is approximately, this is approximately 1.414. Okay, and take note, I use the word approximately because you cannot really express the exact value of this number to this just set of decimal number. Okay, and therefore, we call these numbers as what do we call numbers such as this one? Square root of 2, square root of 3, pi, e, and so on. So we call this irrational numbers. Very good. Okay, so we call this irrational numbers. So again, now let me recall. Okay, let me recall. We started with natural numbers. Okay. We started with natural numbers. Okay. Which then we added 0. Okay, to come up with the set of whole numbers. Okay. And then we added the negative numbers there. Okay, we added the negative numbers. Okay, to come up with the integers. Okay. Tapos, these natural numbers are also called positive numbers. Okay. Yun yung positive numbers natin if you would recall. So this whole thing are all negative number, are all integers. Then we have here another set of numbers, the rational numbers. Okay. That's another set on its own. Okay. And then we also have irrational numbers, which is another set of its own. Now, collectively, okay, these are all of the sets of numbers. Okay, these are all of the numbers that we have known so far. Okay, ito yung set of numbers that we have known so far. In your study of mathematics from kinder up to this point, these are the set of numbers that you already know. Okay. Now, at this point, we will now have to extend this. Okay, we will have to extend this set of numbers. Okay, what would be our motivation to extend this set of numbers? Actually, ginagawa nyo to before. Okay, and this is something that you have studied before. Okay, pero the motivation actually comes from the solution of the equation such as x squared plus 1 equals 0. or basically x squared equals -1. Okay? That's where our motivation for extending this set of numbers again to another set or to a bigger set. Okay? So, in this case, kung titingnan nyo mabuti, the problem states that you need to think of a number. You need to think of a number, okay, that is when you square becomes -1. But of course, this is impossible with the given set of numbers that we have here. Okay. For one thing, the rules of our integer, the rules of multiplication for integers state that if you multiply two numbers that have the same sign, the answer should be anyone? If you have if you multiply two integers, okay, regardless, yeah. So if you multiply two numbers having the same sign, you would have positive as an answer, which in this case would be not true. Kasi yung square means you are multiplying the same number. Eh. So therefore, they also carry the same sign, and therefore, the answer should be positive. Okay? So in that case, we will now again extend, okay, your set of numbers so that we could answer this one, okay, by defining a number, okay. Again, we will define a number x equals, or we will define a number I, okay, which is equal to the square root of -1, okay, which we will call this now as your imaginary unit. Okay? So we will use I to pertain to imaginary unit, although in our case, instead of actually using I, we will use J because we are on the electrical engineering field. Okay? Sakop kasi tayo ng electrical engineering field eh. And that we will have to use the symbol I for another thing in the future. Okay? And for one thing, the number one application of the lesson for complex numbers would actually be on electrical analysis. Okay? So that is why meron kayong there's a quantity there that you would have to symbolize using I. That is why for electrical engineers, instead of using I as the complex number, we use J. Okay, pero in our case, since we are studying mathematics as pure mathematics, we will just be using either I or J. So whichever you are comfortable with, kasi sa calculator nyo kasi I yan eh. Okay? Although MATLAB or Octave would use either I or J, okay, your calculator, kung may calculator pa kayo dyan na scientific, uses I as the imaginary unit. Okay? Now, what would happen now is this. Okay? We will call now this thing as the realm of real numbers. Okay? Tatawagin natin ngayon itong buong number set na to. We will now call them as the real numbers. And then what would happen is that these real numbers would then be under, okay, would then be, kumbaga masasakop siya, okay. Okay, this would now then be, yan. It would be encompassed by a larger set of numbers, which we will call the complex numbers. Okay. Now, as of now, this is the largest universe of numbers that we have. Ito na yung pinakamalaking set of numbers that we know as of now. But we don't know if someday, again, we will need to have to extend these complex numbers. Okay? We will have to extend these complex numbers into a larger set. Okay? Pero as of now, that's the largest universe of numbers that we know of. Okay? That can actually that can answer every known equation that we have as of now. Okay? So, kung titingnan niyo yung history nung sets of numbers natin kasi, mathematicians keep on inventing sets of numbers in order for them to solve certain equations. Okay? And as of now, this set of complex numbers, okay, are the largest set of numbers that we know of that can answer every equation that we know of as of now. Okay, we don't know that in the future we need to invent another set of numbers. Okay, we are not really sure that if we need to invent another set of numbers in order to solve more equations. Pero as of now, ito yung largest set of numbers that can actually solve all known equations that we know of. Okay, is that understood? Okay. Now, you might be sige, pababa na. You might be wondering, how can the complex numbers be or encompass the set of real numbers? Paano nasasakop ng complex numbers yung real numbers? Okay. This comes after the definition of your complex numbers. Okay? So your complex numbers is defined as x plus iy. Okay? Or basically, it's the sum of two numbers. Okay? Your complex number is the sum of two numbers. Okay? That first number is what we call the real part. If we let this as z, if we let z as a complex number, which will carry the form x plus iy, okay, the x part, or this x component is what we call the real part of z. Okay? In notation, we will have this as real part of z. Okay? While y here, okay, the one that is multiplied to I, which we have called as the imaginary unit. Okay? We call I as the imaginary unit. Okay? Yung y here is called the imaginary part. Of z. Okay? By notation, okay, or by formal notation, we will have to designate it as Im. Okay? Im of z. So in this case, the real part of z is equal to x and the imaginary part of z is equal to y. Okay? So therefore, basically, your complex number are composed of two real numbers. Basically, yung x at saka yung y, okay, both x and y belongs to the set of real number. Okay, both of them belong to the set of real number. But if you multiply y, okay, if you multiply any real number with an imaginary unit, okay, that becomes an imaginary number. Okay, we simply call y as the imaginary part, but we don't call y as the imaginary number. Okay, we call iy as an imaginary number, but we don't call y itself as an imaginary number. Basically, y itself is still a real number. Okay? Both x and y here actually belongs to the set of real numbers. But if you multiply y with I, the imaginary unit, iy becomes an imaginary number. Okay? Is the distinction between imaginary number and imaginary part clear? Maliwanag ba yun? Okay. So remember, imaginary part is different from imaginary number. Okay? When you say imaginary number, that's a number that is multiplied to an imaginary unit. Okay? Pero yung imaginary part, okay, is basically a real number, but is that real number that is multiplied to the imaginary part. Imaginary unit. Okay? So, ayun. That is why we can say that complex numbers are actually a complex number can actually form a larger set of, or we can form the complex numbers from real numbers. Because basically, the components or the component parts of your complex number are both real numbers. Okay? So, kinaiba lang naman nun, ang kinaiba lang naman niya with the real number is that yung isa sa mga yon ay nakamultiply sa imaginary unit. And again, your imaginary unit is square root of 1. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Good. Sige. Okay. Now, one available notation that we can use, okay? One available notation that we can use in order for us to represent your complex number is this one. Okay? This means that you can also, you represent it as parang ordered pair. Okay? And when you say ordered pair, what comes first and what comes the second matters. That's why it's called an ordered pair. Kumbaga, 4-3 is different from 3-4. Okay? That's why it's called an ordered pair. Okay? So you can represent complex numbers as an ordered pair. Okay? This is consistent with what we have used as x plus iy. Okay? So x here is the imaginary, the real part, okay, of the complex number, while y is the imaginary part of the complex number. Okay? So, okay. So, ayun. The imaginary unit, okay, the imaginary unit then is denoted using z equals 0 plus I, okay, in which you can now designate it as 1 with the ordered pair 0 and 1. Okay, malinaw ba yung equivalence ng dalawang to? Okay, so sige. Now, as with when you were studying new numbers or new sets of numbers, for example, nag-aral kayo ng fraction or nag-aral kayo ng integers or nag-aral kayo ng irrational numbers, the first thing that you studied, okay, after after studying those numbers are the arithmetic operations involved, or how do you operate on these new numbers. Okay? So, kaya nag-aral kayo ng addition of fraction, multiplication of fractions, and so on and so forth. Okay? Or addition of integers, multiplication of integers, and so on and so forth. So, we will also do that here. Okay? So, in terms of ordered pair, okay? In terms of ordered pair, when you add two complex numbers, you simply have to add the first numbers and the second numbers in order to form the sum. So again, the sum is basically an ordered pair also. Okay, basically the sum is an ordered pair also. But basically, yung first number ng ordered pair is the sum of the first numbers, okay, x1 and x2. And then yung second number ng sum would be the sum of the second numbers of the given. So y1 plus y2. Equivalently, since we have tayo. So addition of numbers, of complex numbers. Okay, so we have z1 plus z2. Okay, so we have x1 y1 plus x2 y2, okay, becomes x1 plus plus x2, then y1 plus y2. Okay? Or equivalently, okay, when we write this in terms of the original notation that we have used, we will have x1 plus I y1 plus x2 plus I y2. Okay? Okay, that should imply the implication of this is that we need to add the real parts. Okay? So we have x1 plus x2. Okay? Plus, then we have to add the imaginary parts. So we have we still have I as a common number to both of this. Okay, then we will multiply this by y1 plus y2. So that's the sum of a complex, of two complex numbers. Okay, is this clear? Okay, so sige. Now, how about multiplication? Okay, pagpasensyahan niyo na yung sulat ko dito sa sa board. Tawag ito. Ganyan talaga, medyo mahirap masanay magsulat sa sa tablet. Medyo mahirap talaga sanayin yung sarili magsulat sa tablet. Anyway, wala namang pinagkaiba yung sulat ko sa tablet tsaka sa whiteboard kung sakasakali na naka face-to-face classes tayo. So, ayun. Tisin niyo na lang. Okay. So, pero pag kayo hindi maintindihan, please do point it out. Okay. So, yeah. So, we have to multiply Z1 times Z2. Okay? So, that is simply, in terms of ordered pair notation, okay, this is X1, Y1, times X2, Y2. Okay. Now, this, mas madali itong kunin. This is easily obtainable if we actually shift to this notation. Okay. And by the way, this notation, pangalanan natin this notation is called the rectangular. Okay. This notation is called the rectangular form. Okay. Yung notation na to, yung x plus iy is called the rectangular form. Okay? Is that clear? Okay, sige. So we can easily obtain, the product of two complex numbers in rectangular form kasi that should actually give more intuition rather than this one. Okay? Mas intuitive 'yun Okay? Meaning mas suggestive 'yun compared to this notation, to the ordered pair notation. Okay? So let's write this as x1 plus I y1 multiplied to x2 plus I y2. Okay. Now, meron kayong tinatawag na method dito foil. Kung ito yung tinatawag nyo, foil method. First, outer, inner, last. Okay. But you have to remember one thing before you actually do the foil here. Okay. You have to remember this. What would be the product I times I? Kasi that is something that you would have to encounter here. So we need to evaluate the product I times I. Or basically, that's I square. Okay? We need to evaluate the number I square. Okay. So remember that I, the imaginary unit, is square root of 1, of negative 1. Okay, so multiplying that with the square root of negative 1, okay, that should give us the square root of negative 1 times negative 1. Okay. Ay, hindi. Mali pala yan. Sorry. Mali yun, Huwag yung gagawin yan. Okay. which becomes square root of -1 square, okay, which should give us what? -1. Okay. Bakit mali yung ginawa ko kanina? Okay. Technically, sa rules ng irrational numbers, tama actually 'yun. Kaya lang that assumes that you can actually extract the roots, or that actually that rule applies only if your irrational number is a real number. For example, if you have square root of 2 times the square root of 3, okay? This should imply square root of 2 times 3, which is equal to square root of 6. Tama yan. Okay? But that is you can apply that rule if this and this are both real numbers. Okay? If both of them, halimbawa square root of -1 times square root of -1, gagawin yung square root of -1 times -1. Tapos what would happen is that, what is -1 times -1? Diba, positive 1 yan, which will give you square root of 1, 1. Okay. This is wrong. Okay. Dahil number 1, you cannot apply this rule because both of these are not real numbers. Okay. Square root of -1 is not a real number. Square root of -1 is not a real number. Okay. So therefore, you cannot apply this rule. Okay. Number 2, bakit hindi siya pwede? Remember that the imaginary unit, okay, the imaginary unit were motivated as an answer, or well, yung motivation natin in obtaining the imaginary unit was born out of the problem x squared equals -1. Okay? So that if we have assumed that the answer here is the imaginary unit I, okay, then therefore I square equals -1. Okay? That is why, yun, I square should be equal to -1. Is that clear? Sige. Pag ito yung pinagbasihan nyo, mali na kagad kayo. Mamamali na, kumbaga, yung ginamit yung motivation is not consistent with this answer. So therefore, mali talaga to, ha? Okay, this is very wrong. Okay? So, yun. So therefore, we conclude that I square equals -1. Remember that. Okay? So what would happen? We then multiply this one, and this one. So we have x1 times x2. Then we have plus I x1 y2. Then we have plus I x2 y1. Okay, and then finally we have I square y1 y2. Tama ba? Okay. Now, again, sabi ko nga sa inyo, sige, pababa. We will have to encounter this one, that I square. Okay? And which that I square equals -1. So therefore, you would have something like x1, x2 minus y1, y2, okay, plus these two terms having I, combine natin siya in one single term as x1, y2, plus x2, y1. Okay? So which means that the product of two complex numbers is still a complex number. Okay, pero ito yung magiging real part niya, and this would be the imaginary part. That is why we can actually write in ordered pair form, okay, in ordered pair form, the product as x1 x2 minus y1, y2, and then x1, y2, y2 plus x2, y1. Okay? Is that clear? Sige. Okay. So, now, if you, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, that electrical engineers often write J instead of I. Okay? Because they need I for the current. Okay, normal kung nag-aaral na kayo ng ng electric circuits, okay? You might have been using I, okay, for current. Okay? Now if x is 0, okay? If the real part of the number ito, if we actually let here equal 0, then we will have yi. And then we call now this number as a pure imaginary number. Okay? We simply call this as a pure imaginary number. Okay? So, therefore, ayan. So, dinefine na natin to. I squared equals -1. Okay? This is the addition notation. Okay? In rectangular form. This is the multiplication. This is the product in rectangular form. Okay? And as I said before, that the rectangular form is actually a more practical notation, more intuitive notation than the ordered pair notation. Okay? You would also know that if you are studying vectors, kaya lang wala na kayong vector analysis, di ba? Tama ba? Wala na kayong vector analysis. Meron pa rin. Mukhang meron pa rin. Sige. Meron kayo last year?
Last term po.
Last term. Meron pa pala. So, if you know vectors, kung nag-aral kayo ng vector analysis, the study of the vector analysis and the complex numbers are actually related. So, in fact, kung nag-aral pala kayo ng vector analysis, you also studied, in part, you also studied differentiation of complex numbers, in part. Okay? Hindi lang yun yung approach sa inyo, pero that is actually the basis of the differentiation of vectors, okay, is based from the differentiation of complex numbers, because yung complex numbers at saka yung vectors are actually related fields. Okay, medyo related fields yung dalawang yan. Naalala niyo yung divergence? Yung ganitong operation? Tama ba? Parang nakalimutan ko na rin vector analysis ko. Basta merong operation na divergence of a function, of a vector, say A. Tapos meron kayong ginagawang operations dyan. Okay? That operation is actually related to complex differentiation. Okay? Not similar, but related to. Okay? So, ayun. So, we have an example here, no? Let's say, for example, we have Z1 equals 8 plus 3i, and Z2 equals 9 plus 9 minus 2i. Okay? Now, we say that 8 is the real part of Z1, 9 is the real part of Z2, 3, okay? 3 is the imaginary part of Z1, okay? And then -2 is the imaginary part of Z2. Okay? Is that clear? Okay, so sige. From a peak of 13, ngayon 8 na lang yung nagre-respond sa akin. Okay, so yung iba tumambay na yan. Okay, so when we add now Z1 and Z2, we simply add the real parts, which will give you 17. Okay? And then the imaginary parts, 3 at saka negative 2i, which would give you positive I or positive 1 as the imaginary part. Therefore, the sum of Z1 and Z2 would be 17 plus I. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now, how about their products? Okay. So their products would then be something like this one. Okay. Pero sana kung kukuha kayo ng ganitong product, okay, if you are to obtain or if you are to solve this kind of product, sana madali niyo na siya makukuha dahil you know that the first yung products ng first term at saka yung last term becomes the real part. Okay? And then yung outer tsaka yung inner becomes the imaginary part. For example, in this case, you have 72. Okay? 72, which is 8 times 9. Okay? Plus 6. Okay? Which is 3 times negative 2 times negative 1. Saan ko nakuha yung negative 1? Again, itong 6, galing yan sa 3 times negative 2 times negative 1. Saan nakuha tong negative 1 na to? Dun sa I square. Take note, pag minultiply nyo to, tsaka to, okay, that's 3 times negative 2 times I. So that's I squared. So doon natin kukunin yung negative 1. Okay, very good. So kaya magiging positive 6 siya. Okay? So you now have 72 plus 6, that would be 78. Okay. Now how about the outer at saka inner? I-add natin siya, which is this is negative 16. Okay? Then this is positive 27. So ito yung negative 16 plus 27. So that's 11i. Okay? Although this can be performed using your calculator in the complex form. Okay? Pero nakuha niyo muna to? Nakuha niyo ba to? Saglit lang ha. Ito. Sige, pababa niyo ng hands. So, lagay natin ito sa complex mode 2. Then we have 8 plus 3i times 9 minus 2i equals 78 plus 11i. So, makukuha niyo naman yan using your calculator. Okay? So, pero please do not forget kung paano nakuha din yan. Okay? Please do not forget how were you able to obtain that 78 plus 11i. Okay? And in your quizzes or in your assignments or in your exams, I won't really not bar you from using your calculator to get this one. Okay, kasi kasama naman sa skill set yan yung paggamit ng calculator. And in fact, if you're taking the board exams, kailangan nga alam nyo na kunin siya through calculator. Pero please do not forget how they are actually obtained. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Please lower your hands. Now, in terms of subtraction tsaka division naman, basically, we can just simply direction natin yung discussion, no? We can just simply in terms of subtraction, we can just simply subtract the real part and the imaginary parts. Okay? Anyway, subtraction is the additive inverse. Okay? It's the inverse of addition. Okay, so if we are to subtract two quantities, we have to get the additive inverse of the second operand, okay, and then add them. Okay, pero basically that makes it isusubtract lang naman natin siya. Okay, as simple as that. Okay, pero in terms ng division, okay, ito yung medyo iba. Okay, because say for example, you are obtaining the quotient x1 plus dito na lang pala. Okay, you are obtaining dali lang ah. Oops. So, subtraction, lagay na rin natin. Subtraction, you have Z1 minus Z2 okay, equals X1 minus X2 plus I times Y1 minus Y2. Okay? That's for your subtraction. Now, for division, ganito siya. Okay. So, yung Z1 over Z2 natin is equal to X1 plus plus I Y1. Again, pwede ko naman gamitin yung J. I can use J, but in this case, ginagamit ko lang muna yung I. Okay? In any case, if the problem uses J, okay, you can use J. But if the problem uses I, you can use I. Okay? So this is X plus I Y1 over X2 plus I Y2. Okay. In order for you to find the quotient of this, okay, you need to multiply this, okay, with X2 minus I Y2. Okay, so we need to multiply this thing with the ratio of X2 minus I Y2. Now, take note that these two are the same numbers. Yung X2 minus I Y2 sa numerator is essentially the same as X2 minus I Y2. Okay? So, equal numbers ito. Which means their ratio is equal to 1. Okay? Pag titingnan nyo to, since parehong number to, and if you divide two numbers that are the same, okay, or of the same value, then the ratio becomes 1. So therefore, wala kayong babaguhin sa value nito. Because basically, you're just multiplying this value with 1. Pero multiplying this given with this ratio, even this is 1, would actually alter the form of this one. Okay? So, how do we find the product of this? Okay? So, basically, this is, tingnan nyo kung masusundan niya, x1, x2, that's minus negative plus y1, y2. Tama ba? The real part of the product of the numerator. Okay. Good. Then, what do we have next? So, this is the real part. So, plus I times x1 or x2 y1 minus x1 y2. Okay? Now, divided by so this is x squared. Okay? This is x squared plus y squared. Tama? Nasa denominator ako. So this is plus y squared. Okay, and then this is yung imaginary part ito becomes 0 because basically this is x2 y1 minus this is negative. Ito. That's negative. Tapos plus, ito, x2, y1. Sorry, x2, y2 pala. So, this basically becomes 0. So, therefore, ito lang yung may iwan sa denominator. Okay? So, therefore, the product or the quotient of Z1 over Z2 is basically x1, x2 plus y1, y2 over x2 square plus y2 square plus, okay, I times x2 y1 minus x1 y2 over x2 square plus y2 square. Yan. And then notice that I have to separate the real part and the imaginary part of the quotient. We need to separate pa yung imaginary part, yung real part at imaginary part ng quotient. Because basically, we have to write this in rectangular form. Okay? Is this understood? Okay, good. Okay, so as an example again here, okay, if you subtract 8 plus 3i and 9 minus 2i, that becomes negative 1. 8 minus 9 is negative 1. Tapos 3 minus negative 2, that is positive 5. Okay, so you now have their difference as negative 1 plus 5i. Okay, is this nasundan ba to? Okay. Now, pababan lang. In terms of division naman, when you divide 8 plus 3i over 9 minus 2i, basically this is 72, okay, minus 6. Okay, this is 72 minus 6, so that's 66. Okay, and then you have 16 plus 27. Okay, so the 16 plus 27, that is 43. Okay, that's 43i. Okay, dito naman sa ilalim, you now have 9 times 9, that's 81. Okay, and then negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 1, so that's positive 4. Okay, and then yung imaginary part na nasa ilalim becomes 0. Okay, so therefore, you now have 81 plus 4 here simply. So you now have 66 over 85 plus 43 over 85i. Okay? So, is this clear enough? Okay. So, sige. Now, one important sige pababa ng hands. So one important property of complex numbers is that we can actually put their definition, their very definition into those raising their hands. Do you have questions ba? Miss Gonzalez, do you have questions? Wala naman. Okay. So what we one main advantage or one main thing about these complex numbers is that they can actually, or they do actually have geometric significance. Okay, so by actually putting them in a coordinate system, okay, we will be able to extract some important properties of your complex numbers, which will be later on be very important in some of the applications. Okay. So first thing, we will put this or we will modify your coordinate system, your Cartesian coordinate system into in a manner by which the horizontal axis would depict real axis. So we will put the real part, okay, of your or we will define your real part of your complex numbers along the horizontal axis, while the vertical axis would be considered part of the imaginary axis. Okay? So yung imaginary part of your complex number would be defined or would be located on the vertical or imaginary axis. Okay? So that is why valid pa rin yung natin, yung ordered pair natin or yung ordered pair notation natin. So if you have the complex number, say for example, z equals x plus iy, okay? Its location on the Cartesian plane or on this time we call this now as the complex plane. Kapag yung horizontal axis niya is the real axis, while the vertical axis is the imaginary axis. We call this now your complex plane. Or another term that we can use for this one is the Argand diagram. Okay? So another way to use this is another term that we can use to define this one or to call this one is the Argand diagram. Okay. So for example, you now have the number z equals 4 plus minus 3i. Okay? You now have the number 4 minus 3i. Okay. So you now have equivalently, you now have the ordered pair for negative 3 for this one. Okay, you now have the ordered pair for negative 3 for this one. So how do we locate this now on your Cartesian plane or basically on your complex plane? Okay, so we locate yung 4 along the horizontal axis. So this is 4 units. Okay, and then we locate negative 3 along the y-axis or the vertical axis. Now, we consider yung down or yung downward direction niya dahil siya ay negative. So, negative 3 means 3 below the 0. Okay? So, ito yung negative. So, therefore, yung intersection nila dito is your the location of your complex number 4 minus 3i. Okay. Is this understood? Okay. So now, we can actually sige, bababa nung hands. Okay. So now we now can see how complex numbers are the addition and subtraction of complex numbers are interpreted, okay, in the complex plane. Okay? So paano natin siya ginagawa? Since for example, you have Z1 and Z1 and Z2 here as your complex numbers. Take note that when we add two complex numbers, okay, when we add two complex numbers, Z1 plus Z2, okay, we add their real parts. Okay, so we have X1 plus X2. Okay, and then we add their imaginary parts, Y1 plus Y2. Okay, so that the sum of this would actually have the coordinate pair x1 x1 plus x2 and then y1 plus y2. Okay, so kung ilalagay natin siya dito, that basically is getting the x coordinate of this one and then add of x1, okay, and then getting the x coordinate of this one, x2, Tapos i-add natin siya. So basically, this number of units plus this number of units becomes this number of units. Okay? So that this becomes x1 plus x2. Okay, same thing with y. Okay, so this is your y1, this is your y2. Okay, and then when we add this and then this, when we add this one at saka this one, we will have something like this one. Okay? So that is your y1 plus y2. Okay? So you now can locate the sum at another point. Okay? But another way of actually interpreting that that operation. Okay? Tingnan natin muna siya. Another way of interpreting that operation is yung tinatawag nating head-tail addition. Okay, that is we actually put Z2. This is your Z2. Okay. We actually put this one at the end of your Z1. Okay, and then from the start of Z1 until the end of the Z2, okay, would be the sum. Okay? Yung magiging dulo nung nila, yun yung magiging sum. And I hope meron na ba kayong meron na kayong statics of rigid bodies? Wala pa kayo nun? Mechanics of something like that. Mechanics of rigid bodies.
Wala.
O statics, yeah. Wala pa kayo?
Wala po sa curriculum.
Wala kayo sa kurilo? Seryoso? Wala kayong statics? Tsaka dynamics of rigid bodies? Talaga? Okay.
Wala.
Anyway, this might come across to you. Ito, kung makikita niyo to, anyway, na-encounter niyo rin to sa vector addition. Okay? Ay, sinabi ko na pala. This might come across to you as yung process ng vector addition. Yung tinatawag, kung napag-aralan niyo to sa vector analysis niyo, yun yung tawag na parallelogram method of adding vectors. Yan. Did you study this sa vector analysis? Yung vector addition? Sila nakakaalala. Oh. Ayun. Pero basically, this is the parallelogram method of adding vectors. Baka iba lang yung interpretation niyo, pero basically, this is how you add vectors. Okay? We can consider kasi this as vector. This one. We can consider that as a vector. Okay? And then we can consider this as another vector. I mean this one. We can consider this as another vector. Kung tama yung kung meron kayong two-dimensional vector, for example, Z1, for example, as 4i plus 3j. Okay? Two-dimensional vector to. Okay? And then, meron kayong another vector na say, negative 3i plus 4j. Okay? That basically is Z1. Pag i-add nyo yung dalawang vectors na yan, that is basically 4i minus 3i. Okay? And then plus 3j plus 4j. Okay? Which is basically I minus 7j. Okay? Ganito ba yung ginagamit yung notation sa vector analysis? Kung 2 dimensions lang Isa lang yung nakakaalala. Ano ba pinag-aralan sa vector analysis? 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions? O teka, baka hindi IJK ang gamit nyo, baka AX, AY, AZ. Ano yung notation nyo? Ito. Wala. IJK. Ayan. Okay. Kung IJK, 2 dimensions lang kasi to. That means yung K ko, 0. So that also, ang ibig sabihin nun, kung ilalapat ko siya doon sa ginagamit yung notation, this is 4i plus 3i plus 0k. Okay? Kaya 2 dimensions lang siya kasi wala siya nung third dimension sa sa wala siyang third dimension. Okay? Sa z-axis. Okay? Now, sabi natin wala na yan, no? So, basically, kung tatanggalin niyo tong yung notation na yan, gagawin niyo lang siyang 4 plus 3i at saka negative 3 plus 4i. The manner by which you add this is the same manner by which you add this. Kung mapapansin nyo, pareho lang siya. Okay, so that is why yung sinasabi ko nga that the complex numbers are basically related field siya ng vector analysis. Okay? Because basically, you can consider these complex numbers as vectors. Okay? They can be considered as vectors. Okay? Ito kasi para kayo may terminal point sa 4 tsaka 3. Okay? At saka sa 0 or 3, 0 basically. Ito ganun din. If you put this in a 3-dimensional plane or 3-dimensional axis, okay, meron din yung terminal point sa 4, 3, and 0. Same thing with this one. Okay? So, pag mag-add kayo ng vectors, ito rin yung proseso na ginagamit ninyo. Yun nga lang, kung 3 dimensions, this becomes more complicated kasi ito 2 dimensions lang to. Okay? So, ayun. Now, kung subtraction naman, what would happen is that yung second operand ninyo, if this is Z1 minus Z2, okay, yung second operand natin na Z2 becomes negated. Okay, when you say negated, sige, ipe-preempt ko na. It actually rotates by 180 degrees. So, napupunta to dun sa opposite line niya. Okay? These two having are of the same length. Ito, yung length na yan is of the same length. Okay? Pero magte-terminate yan dun sa opposite side ng line niyo. Okay? And then you can proceed as in addition. So that is ito, ilalagay natin siya sa end nung Z1 and then we will form this line to get the sum of the difference of Z1 and Z2. Okay? Is this clear? Now, we now define, sige, pababa na. We now define conjugate, okay, or complex conjugate numbers. Okay. Sa irrational numbers ninyo, whenever you have something like square root of 2 plus square root of 3, okay, the number square root of 2 minus square root of 3 is called the conjugate. Okay. Sorry. The conjugate of this number. So these two are conjugates of each other. Okay? We call these two as the conjugates of each other. But these are real conjugates. Okay? In terms of complex numbers, okay, the conjugate of x plus iy is x minus iy. Okay? And in fact, you have already seen this you have already used this one. Okay? Nagamit na natin to kanina. Dito. Okay? Yung pinang-multiply natin actually dito sa denominator niya and ginamit na rin natin sa numerator is actually the conjugate of the denominator of this one. Okay? And in fact, may tawag kayo sa proseso na to eh. Okay? If you can recall, if these are irrational numbers, anong tawag nyo sa proseso na yan? Bukod sa finding the quotient. Kung maalala nyo, nung third year high school, grade 9 kayo siguro. Ayun. Nasabi na ni Miss Cordova, pero tadugtungan ko lang. Kung meron kayong problem something like 3 over square root of 2 plus square root of 3, okay? Para matanggal nyo, or so that you can eliminate the radicals under the denominator, or on the denominator, you have to multiply this by square root of 2 minus square root of 3. Okay? Over square root of 2 minus square root of 3. Okay? So that basically means you have to multiply the denominator with its conjugate. Okay? And therefore, yung process na to is actually rationalizing, or you rationalize the denominator. That basically eliminates the irrational numbers on the denominator. That's why we call it rationalize the denominator, or rationalization of the denominator. Okay? So basically, that is the process that we have performed here. Okay? We have rationalized the denominator. That is, we eliminate the irrational number on the denominator. Okay? And one way to eliminate that irrational number, okay, on the denominator, okay, is by actually multiplying that with its conjugate. Kasi nga, makikita nyo naman yung magiging product nung dalawang conjugates. You can see that the product of the two conjugates becomes a real number. Okay? So when you multiply two complex numbers that are conjugates of each other, you basically end up with a real number. Okay? Is that understood? Okay, so sige. Lower down your hands. Now, this is how we interpret geometrically the relationship between two conjugate numbers. Okay, so basically they the conjugate numbers, or a pair of conjugate numbers, are actually a reflection, okay, of the number with respect to the real axis. Okay, so this is your real axis. Okay, these are your conjugate numbers. So basically, reflection siya dun. Okay, or reflection sila of each other, okay, with respect to the real axis. Okay, so the complex conjugate is important because it permits us to switch from complex to real. Okay, again, we can multiply two conjugate numbers, or one pair of complex conjugate numbers to come up with a real number. So that is why if we have the product of z and its conjugate becomes a real number, x squared plus y squared. Okay? Also, we have the following definitions. Okay? We have the following definitions. So we have the real part of z, which is x, can be obtained from the z plus its conjugate divided by 2. While the imaginary part, okay, or y, is obtained from 1 over 2i times z minus its conjugate. Okay? So, these are some of the properties of your conjugate numbers. Okay, if you the conjugate of the sum of complex numbers is equal to the conjugates, to the sum of its conjugates. Okay? Again, the conjugate of the sum of two complex numbers is equal to the sum of its conjugates, of their conjugates pala, sorry. Okay? And then the conjugate of the product of the number is equal to the product of its conjugates. And same thing with the quotient. Okay, so we will use particular examples to verify these properties of conjugate numbers. Okay, siguro sa assignment ito. In your assignment, I would be giving you a chance to prove these things. Okay, using algebraic proof and then particular examples. Okay? So ayun. Sige, ito ilalagay ko lang sa ito mga to, lalagay na natin sa assignment ninyo. Okay? Is that clear? Sige, pababayan ng kamay. Okay pa kayo? Init. Okay, so sige. Tuloy tayo. Total, last meeting naman natin ito sa ngayong taon eh. Okay. So, sige, pababayan ng hands. Okay, now let's proceed with the polar form of complex numbers. So, recall na meron na tayong dalawang forms of complex numbers that we were able to study. So, number one is yung ordered pair form. Okay. And then the number two is the rectangular form. Sulat natin. We have z equals x, y. Okay. And then number two is the rectangular form. Z equals x plus iy. Okay. Those are the two forms of complex numbers that we were able to study so far. Okay. Now we will study the third one. Okay. We will study the third one by expressing your number as a polar form. Okay. Pero saan natin siya muna kukunin? Okay. Where will we be able to get these forms? Okay. Actually, galing yan dun sa that comes from the geometric interpretation of your complex numbers. Okay? So we have, for example, a number here. Okay? Say this is x, y. Okay? And then we will draw a line connecting the origin and that line and that point. Okay? So we will determine two things kasi we want to express this. Okay? Alam na natin that this is the ordered pair. Okay? But we want to express this in terms of its polar coordinates. When you say polar coordinates, this is its r, okay, or how long this line is. Okay? We call the magnitude. Okay? And theta. Okay? This theta is the angle that is made between the positive x-axis, okay, and this line. Okay, we call this the radial line. Okay, so r here is the length of the radial line. Radial line. Okay, which later on we will call as the magnitude. Basically, the magnitude of the complex numbers that we are talking about, or the complex number that we are talking about. And then this one, theta, okay, so this is r, and this is theta, okay, is the angle, okay, of the radial line with respect to the positive real axis. Okay? So, yung angle natin laging nakabase dito sa positive real axis. Okay? So, this is your real axis. This is the positive real axis. Okay? We will have to base our angle from there. Okay? So, we will call this later on as the angle of your complex number. So, ito yung kanyang polar coordinate. This is the rectangular coordinate. This is the polar coordinate. Now, given that this is, the length of this is x, and then here, the length of this is y, how do we find r? Okay, how do we find r from there? Okay, so take note that this is a right triangle. So, ito, y ito. So, yung r natin is basically found using what formula? Using Pythagorean theorem. So, basically, we will have the square root of x squared plus y squared. Okay? While the angle is found, okay, by which formula? Or by which function? Given ito, at saka to. Okay, so the angle, okay, or the angle is defined by the function tangent. So therefore, para mahanap yung angle, we will use the arctan or arctangent function. So this is arctan of y opposite over adjacent. Okay, so these two formulas would give the rectangular coordinate of your complex number. Okay? Now, from here naman, how do we find now the x coordinate given yung r at saka yung theta? How do we find x? Given yung r, which is the hypotenuse, tapos yung x ninyo is what we want to find. You know theta, okay? So how do we find x there? Okay, ganito. What is the relationship between r, theta, and saka x?
Sa cosine function po, sir.
So we have cosine of Miss Cordova.
X is equal to r cosine theta po.
Kasi tinuloy na niya. Pero that's x equals r cosine theta. Okay? Ayun, theta. Okay, which stems from the fact that your cosine theta is defined using or as adjacent over hypotenuse. So therefore, you can solve x as r cosine theta. In a similar manner, you can have y as galing sa sine. Okay? O sine of theta, sorry. Sine of theta equals, what is sine of theta? Dito.
Y over r po.
Y over r. Saglit lang. Ayan. Y over r. Okay. So therefore, y is then r sine theta. Now, writing your complex number z, okay, in terms of x plus iy, going back to rectangular form, we can actually use the polar coordinates in order for us to write this number say as r cosine theta plus I times r sine theta or r times cosine theta plus I sine theta. That is your number C. Okay? So basically, you can obtain the polar coordinates. Okay, you can obtain the polar coordinates of your complex number using these formulas. Okay? Now, you can now rewrite your complex number J using these polar coordinates. Okay? And thereby having what we call the polar form. Okay? The polar form. Wala. Ayun, the polar form of your complex number. Ulitin ko ha. Yung R, itong coordinate na to, yung R, theta, are the polar coordinates. Okay? This is your polar form. If you write your complex numbers in terms of R and theta in this form, okay, you are writing the polar form of your complex number. Although, this one has a shortcut notation. Meron tayong shortcut notation dyan as R bar angle theta. Okay? So instead of actually writing this as R cosine theta plus I sine theta, ito na lang yung shortcut niya, R bar angle theta. Is this clear? Okay. So ito. Now, sige, pababa na. So again, we call R as the magnitude of your complex numbers. Another term na ginagamit din ng mga libro, so aside from magnitude, they also use the term modulus. Okay, for R. Okay. And theta is the angle. Okay. And this book uses argument as another term. Okay, it uses the term argument as another term. Now, I would like to talk about theta. Okay, pag-usapan natin yung theta. Because theta, okay, would only be defined in between negative 180 degrees to positive 180 degrees. Or basically, in terms of radians, this would be defined from negative pi up to positive pi. Okay? So, which means ganito. Yung measurement ng theta ninyo, tandaan nyo ha, the measurement of your theta, okay, always originates from, that would always originate from the positive y-axis, positive x-axis. Okay? It would always originate from the positive x-axis. Okay? Or the positive real axis, to be more precise. Okay? So which means, if your number is here, okay, if your number is on the first quadrant, this would be your theta. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. If your number is on the second quadrant, okay, if your number is on the second quadrant, this should be your theta. Okay? Is this clear? Now, kung ang number nyo ay nandito, ito na yung ibang usapan. If your number is there, somewhere in the third quadrant, again, we measure your theta from the positive y-axis, from the positive real axis. But you don't do it this way. Okay, you don't do it that way. Instead, you go you go clockwise. You go from here to here. Okay. But take note that if in that case you are measuring your angle in a negative sense. Okay, you are measuring your angle in a negative sense. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Pero take note that if you are measuring your angle this way, the greatest angle that you can measure is basically this one. If you are going from here to here, okay, pag positive siya, or this one, if you're going from here to here, which is negative. Okay? So, ganito yan. If your point is on the first or second quadrant, you can expect that your angle is positive. Okay? While if your point is on the negative, is on the third or fourth quadrant, you can expect that your angle is negative. Okay? And conversely, if your angle is negative, it means that your point or that your number is either on the third or on the fourth quadrant, depending on how large the angle is. Okay? And if your point is positive, if your angle is positive, then your point is on the either first or the second quadrant, depending on how large the angle is. Basta ito lang yung range niya. Negative 180 to positive 180. If your angle is greater than those, pag mas malaki siya doon, okay, it means it has an equivalent. Okay, it has an equivalent angle, okay, that is within this range. Okay? For example, meron kayong binigay na na angle na R bar angle, sabihin natin negative 274 degrees. Okay? Saan natin kukunin yung negative 274 na yan? Una, negative siya. So you have to measure it from the positive real axis pero clockwise. So going from here to here is negative 180. Tapos from here to here, that's negative 270. So yung 274 is somewhere here. So ito yung magiging parang terminal point nyo. Okay? And equivalently, you have an angle, you can measure that equivalent angle from here to here. So ano yung equivalent angle ngayon of that one? This is 4 degrees. So ito, pwedeng express as R bar angle, what angle?
86.
86 degrees. So itong dalawang yan, provided na pareho yung R nila, okay, provided that R here are the same, then these two pertains to the same number. Okay, these two numbers would pertain to the same. These two notations would pertain to the same number. Okay? Is this clear? Okay. Now, there is a better way of actually pababa ng kamay. There is a better way of actually multiplying and dividing your numbers, but this time in polar form. Okay. So if you actually have this as your first number in polar form, and this is actually your number on your second number in polar form also. If you actually multiply them, okay, you would arrive at this one. You would have arrived here, and then if you simplify, you would have something like this one. Okay. So in this case, as you can see, if we actually reduce this, first thing, if we actually write this in terms of its shortcut notation, that is R1 bar angle theta 1, while this one as R2 bar angle theta 2. Kung titingnan nyo mabuti ito, yung product nila in terms of the polar form, you can actually actually write this as R1 R2 bar angle theta 1 plus theta 2. Kasi pasin nyo, cosine ay sine yan. Okay? So, kaya lang, ang arguments nila is theta 1 plus theta 2. So, that is why we can write this notation in terms of this 1. Okay? So, ano yung point natin dito? What would be our point here? As you can see, the product of two complex numbers in polar form are the product of their magnitudes and the sum of their angles. So, gagawin natin, kung meron tayong numbers in polar form, okay, we simply multiply their magnitudes and then add their angles. Is that clear? Okay. In the same manner, okay, in terms of division, you can also do that. Okay. In this case, the quotient of C1 over C2 is R1 over R2 par angle theta 1 minus theta 2. Okay. So here, okay, you have to divide the magnitudes. Okay. And then that angle would be the difference of the angles of Z1 and Z2. Okay? So, let's see how that applies. Okay. So, example, no? Z1 equals negative 2 plus 2i, and then Z2 equals 3i. Now, in terms of polar form, how do we write this one? Okay. So we first determine R, for example. This is negative 2 square plus 2 square root niyan. This is 4 plus 4, 8. This is 2 square root of 2. Tama? Is this correct? How about their angle? This is arctangent of 2 over 2. Okay. The arctangent of 2 over 2 or the arctangent of 1 is basically 45 degrees. Pero ang tanong, anong quadrant ito? What quadrant do we locate this one? Second quadrant, negative x, positive y. So this is on the second quadrant. So basically, kung 45 degrees yan, ibig sabihin yung number ninyo, okay, your number is here, yung 45 degrees na yan, ito. So therefore, ang hinahanap nating angle, basically ito, which is 135 degrees. Okay? So that's how you evaluate the angles. Okay? Although, I don't know if kinuha nyo sa calculator itong negative 2 over negative 2, that gives you 135 degrees directly. Pero basically, ang mas magandang gawin niyo para standard yung solution niyo is that you simply divide these two without taking into consideration the signs. Okay? And that gives you the smallest angle. Okay? That should give you the smallest angle. That angle less than 90 degrees. Okay? And then, from there, locate nyo kung nasang quadrant siya. So, we have known that this is on the second quadrant. So, therefore, this 45 degrees that you were able to solve is this one. Okay? But the angle that we are looking for is this, yung galing sa positive x-axis. So, therefore, that angle, okay, is written now as, instead, 135 degrees. So, therefore, this is 2 square root of 2 bar angle 135 degrees. Is that clear? How about this one? You have R here as, since this is written as 0 plus 3i, okay, we can have R as 0 square plus 3 square. So basically, that's 3. Okay, and its angle is basically arctangent of 3 over 0. Okay, so since this is 3 over 0, it means that your point is on the x-axis, specifically here. Kasi 3i yan eh. So kung ipa-plot mo yan, nandito siya. Okay? So that is why you don't really use the arctangent to compute. It's easier to actually plot it first para ma-visualize nyo kung nasan siya talaga. Okay? So that you can actually locate where the point is, and then you can determine easily kasi from here you cannot compute this one. Okay? Pero if you actually locate this point, this 3i, you can actually locate it here. That is your 3. Okay? Therefore, what is the angle here? Ito yung point nyo. Ito yung angle na hinahanap ko. What is the angle here?
90 degrees po.
So this is 90 degrees. So therefore, in polar form, this is 3 bar angle 90 degrees. Okay? Now, from there, what is the product? The product Z1, Z2 is basically 2 square root of 2 bar angle 135 degrees times at bar angle 90 degrees. Pag nagdi-degrees kayo, don't forget the degrees, ha? Okay? Please do not forget the unit degrees if you are using degrees. Kasi kapag hindi kayo naglagay ng unit dyan, I would construe it as regions. Okay? If you don't put, for example, nilagay nyo lang 135, this should be interpreted as 135 regions. Okay? So if you want this to be interpreted as degrees, this should be written. Kailangan may degree siya. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Now, this would then be 6 square root of 2. That's the product of the modulus or the product of the magnitudes. Bar angle, what is 135 plus 90? 225 degrees. Tama? Is that correct? Okay. But this angle, okay, sige. But this angle is more than 180. Okay, this is more than 180 degrees. So this means that your angle or your point is actually found 90, 180. Okay, this is 270. So 225 is between this and this. So something like this one. Okay, so the length of this is 6 square root of 2. But this is your angle, 225. But again, gusto natin yung angle dito is less than 180. So instead of actually measuring it from here to here, we measure it instead from here to here. And what is this angle then? Ano tong angle na to? That's 135. But we measured it clockwise. So what's the correct sign? Yan. So we measured this negative 135. Because we measured it clockwise, dapat negative siya. So therefore, the correct answer is 6 squared of 2, bar angle negative 135 degrees. That's the product. Then if there is a need for you to convert this back to rectangular form, then you can just simply write this as 6 square root of 2 cosine of negative 135 degrees plus I sine negative 135 degrees. Okay? Or in calculator, we can evaluate that as 6 square root of 2. Naka-degrees ako, no? So, times cosine of negative 135 degrees, okay, plus I sine negative 135 degrees. So that is located at negative 6 minus 6i. Okay? Which, obviously, pag ito, minultiply nyo, yung negative 2 plus 2i, okay, times 3i, that's basically, okay, this is basically negative 6. Okay, tama ba? Negative 6 yan. 2 times 3 times negative 1. O 2 times 3 times I square. That's basically negative 6. And then minus 6i. Which is the result that we are looking for. This results from multiplying the two in rectangular form. Ito naman in polar form. So as you can see, pareho yung results niya. Okay? Is that understood? Okay. So that sige, pababa na. So that should end our session for today. And as I have stated earlier, this would be our last session for this year 2020. Okay? So because next week would be assigned as asynchronous sessions. And just monitor our teams this next few weeks, okay? Next week and then week after that, because I would be assigning I would be assigning different I would be assigning different activities such as assign homeworks, okay? I'd probably be assigning 2 homeworks, and then I'll be assigning some additional lessons, okay, which would come with reading materials and recorded lectures, okay? That would actually finish up, okay, the entire topic on the complex numbers and functions. Okay, so that when we come back next week, okay, when we come back on January, okay, we would be proceeding with the second topic, which is the Laplace transform. Okay, so I'm not saying that you have to do all of those things within the time that you are that you don't have any class. Okay, what I'm saying is that I'll be preparing those materials, okay, in those 2 weeks. If you have time, please go through them. If you don't have time and you wish to celebrate if you wish to rest, or if you wish to celebrate the holidays with your family, that's fine. Okay, it's just that what I'm saying is that I would be leaving you those materials so that we would be able to proceed with the next lesson. Okay, but I hope that when we proceed with the next lesson, you have gone through with all those materials that we have already. Okay, Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, think we can dismiss now. Overtime na ako ng 1 minuto. Okay. So, happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Merry Christmas po. Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Merry
Okay.
Christmas po, sir.
So, simply, yeah. Salamat din. Ingat kayo lagi, ah. Okay. Huwag masyado nalalabas. Please do, log out na lang with from the meeting. Okay. And I'll see you 2021.
Thank you po.
Wait lang. Maglalagay pa ako.
Sir,
Yo.
ipapost naman po yung na-record ngayon na po, sir.
Yeah, ipapost ko siya lahat. Pero tignan nyo rin kung ma-access nyo siya sa stream. Bali kapag natapos yung session natin, makikita nyo, merong parang tawag ito, yung recorded meeting, which you can access using stream. So, pwede nyo siya mapanood doon actually. Pero i-compile ko pa rin siya in a YouTube channel para mas siya, makita nyo siya. Okay?
Okay po, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sige. Wala na. Ayun. Kuha ka lang ng gamit dito. Tingnan mo lang kung ano meron akong. Ito pa, meron pa dito. Pagka ayaw gumana niya.
Ayan na lang, parang mas...
Actually, baka mas maganda to eh. Baka mas maganda. Dali mo pareho.